Yes, we're quite lucky because we get to go to FOSDEM for free without any jet lag, thanks to Philippe, who's on the line. I see we actually have quite a few people dialing in, familiar names like Alexius, hey, Maximilian, we've got Lennart there from BMW, Bernie, Julian, we also have Nicola. So lots of people coming in here. It's really good, Philippe, of you to come and brief us on what happened at FOSDEM. Before I hand over to you, I will just start showing our antitrust policy notice. We show this at the beginning of every meeting, and our full antitrust policy can be found on the Linux Foundation website. We show this so that everyone knows how we work as a community, and that makes sure everyone is super comfortable. Oh, I just saw singing dialed in from Taipei. Hey, singing. I hope you're having a beautiful day. So I'm going to hand over straight to Philippe and pass to him for our 49th webinar, this FOSDEM recap. And, as usual, this is an informal event. You can dive in, ask questions, and offer comments at any point. And I'm sure that not only Philippe, but the audience would find that both acceptable and interesting. But anyway, over to our actual presenter and host, Philippe from nexB, who is also the mind behind things like scan code.
Hey, thank you very much for the introduction. Welcome, everyone. Let me share my screen. You should be able to see this now.
It's looking good. It's perfect.
Good. Perfect. All right. I hope it won't be frustrating. It won't be a full event report, but only a partial event report. Partial on two counts. First, because it's impossible to report on the full event. It's too big. And second, just because it's a tiny focus on things that I care for around software composition analysis, license, and generally OpenChain compliance. So, brief word about me. I'm the lead maintainer for Scan Code and About Code project, but that includes also vulnerable code. I am the creator of package URLs and one of the co-founders of SPDX and Clearly Defined. And I also, by them, maintain, I am the CTO, sorry, and co-founders of nexB. And we make a commercial tool called Deja Code in the space. So, FOSDEM. So if you've never been there, it's really a unique event anywhere in the world. First, it's entirely volunteers led, meaning that there's no company behind it. There are sponsors, of course, to help that, but it's volunteer led and it's free, as in beer and event. There's no registration. You just come in, walk in, and go there. In that sense, that's pretty unique. I don't think of any other event that works this way anywhere else in our space, at least the space of software at large and technology at large. It's taking place every year on the first weekend of February or the last weekend of January, depending on the years, in Brussels, Belgium. And there's about, I think this year was really packed, probably close to 10,000 people that came. And oh, there's a typo. It's not over a week. It's over a weekend, actually. Just Saturday and Sunday. It has evolved such that there are a lot of events that are taking place before and after. It's called the Fringe. And this year there were events taking place like 2-3 days before and a full week after FOSDEM. Some of them as far as London with the State of Open conference. And my trip report is going to be about an event I organized the day before FOSDEM, and specifically key takeaways from the legal and policy dev room and SBOM dev room. So to understand how the event works, you have what's called dev room. So let me go there right away. So basically, you have a process where open source projects, or groups of projects, or subject matter experts submit what's called dev room, or as in development room or developers room. And when it's accepted, it becomes a mini event in the larger event. And each dev room is literally a physical room that's available for a day or a half day. I don't think there's anyone that's available for the full 2 days, but it's typically a day or half day. And you can see all the topics there. So a lot of the topics are, as it should, highly technical, focusing on a specific technology stack, specific on a programming language, or a specific domain, like, for instance, firmware, design, testing, security, and so on. Two rooms of interest for us were here: the software bill of material on the one hand, and the other one being the legal and policy issues dev room. All right. So the day before FOSDEM, there are many fringe events. I organized a workshop specifically on license and security compliance, and that took place on the Friday, whole day. Was interesting. Originally, we were planning to have a free room that was lent to us in a co-working space in Brussels for about 25 folks. And in the 2 weeks before the event, we ended up having to move to a larger venue to support 30, and then 35, and then 40. And then the day before the event, there were about 65 registrations. And we had moved a couple of days before in a larger venue, which had to be in a conference room in a hotel. We had, in fact, really 60 registrations, because there was a snafu, and there were double registrations, and about 55 folks that showed up overall. And the intent and the plan there was to have, in the morning, software developers that would present their plans about each of their tools. So, for instance, the plans from ScanCode, but the plan for the SPDX Python tool, and the plan for this and that. And very briefly, just highlight what that tool does, because the assumption going in was that we already know what does, which tools does what, right? So not focusing on demonstration. And we didn't have any screen to share, any data projector. It was all done on pen and paper with very large post-its. And in the afternoon, having users that would come on stage to expose what would be their needs and requirements in the space, knowing the space is really software compositionalities, license and security compliance. Feel free to interrupt me at any time if you have questions, by the way. So that was mentioned by Shane, but really do it at any time. Okay, I want to make sure, can someone talk? I just want to make sure I still have network connection sometimes.
Oh, yeah, no, everything is fine.
Good. I want to make sure I'm still online. Okay, so in terms of represented tools, it's sorted here by alphabetical order. And we had all these tools being represented and coming on stage, presenting their plans. There was one that was missing, or there were a few that were missing. For instance, I don't see Fossology in this list. I'm sure there are other tools that were not represented. And we'll come to that in a few, but one of the outcomes is that we want to create a living list of all the tools in the space that's in a central place. So we know what tools does what are the plans, and because today it's an information that's scattered in many places. So I won't go too much in the details of the plans of the tools. But what I'd like to do instead is to focus on the takeaways. So to me, the first key insight that came out of this one-day event here was that everyone wants to share the data. When I mean share the data, that means sharing conclusion informations about the origin and license of a package, and potentially also security issues. Share simple things like scans, not to have to redo over and over again. And that's actually a theme that came out also in discussion beyond that day with many other folks. Maybe I'm a bit biased there, but I don't think it is. It was really strong thing that came out. I was discussing the day after FOSDEM, the day after this event on Saturday with a lawyer for one of the largest technology company in the world, and I was asking, hey, if you had a magic wand and you could have a tool that would help you today, what would it be? And the lawyer told me, well, I'm tired to redo the same scan and review the same scans of the same library over and over again. Once I've done it once, I would like it to be, just reused and shared. And so avoiding redoing scans, reviewing the same review, whether inside an organization or across an organization, something that came out a lot. And historically, or more recently, there's really two efforts in this space. One is clearly defined, and the other one is more recently Ocelot at Osadol. Each with pros and cons, and there could be things that could be built upon for sure, or there's something different that needs to be brought there. Some of the issues, of course, is some find it hard to overcome potential objections from their lawyers when it comes to sharing data such as license creation or license conclusion. And I think that's a real problem, because the thing is, your interpretation of a license or your interpretation of which license apply may differ. The discussion we've had there is that if we focus on facts and technical facts on the one end, or we embrace diversity and we accept there's not a single truth, but different approach and different take on you may believe this tool is LGPL license and I may believe it's GPL license. And we just agree to disagree, but just share these facts and how we came to such conclusion, maybe a way to overcome such an issue. There's an issue of trust. If, for instance, someone in company A came to a certain conclusion about the license of a tool, I'm not even talking about usage context, just let's say the general licensing information. I may not agree, or I may not trust them. I may trust someone from my company, I may trust someone I know, but I may not trust what another person came with. So that's another potential barrier to sharing information there. And there are different policies in this domain. And you know, if I take clearly defined, they have a policy to say if the license of a package that's been detected is not listed on the SPDX license list, then it will be reported as other, which means basically it's not a no assertion, it's something between that's not defined. The problem there is, in many cases, it could be less information that you get out of the tool. Take something as mundane as a public domain license that's properly detected, which not a CC0, just a public domain dedication. If you ignore that and say, oh, the tools tell me that this is under the public domain, but the conclusion is tells me, oh, I don't know what it is. You end up having a policy and a standard for conclusion creation, which is what it is, but it provides potentially less information than what the original tool scans were. And so I'm not picking on a specific tool there or a specific project. I'm just saying there's different approaches, different concerns, and they may make this difficult. Of course, there's the perennial problem of what's the motivation for sharing this data, especially sharing that in the public, and how is it can be. But I think again here, given the strong interest of so many people about data sharing, we should be able to overcome the motivation to share this data publicly. One thing that came up also, which would be helpful, is to ensure that we share raw scanners and tool output at first. It's extremely factual, it's pretty non-controversial, and would be probably a good first way. And there were also comments about the fact that we should work to fix upstream licensing issues upstream as much as possible, because otherwise any kind of a creation or conclusion done downstream in a tool or any kind of shared data environment is somewhat doomed if the data and the correction to open source origin and licensing has not been done upstream in the first place. So I'll take a pause for a sec and want to know if anyone has comments or questions on this.
I actually have a quick question. It seems that automation has for a long time been something that people generally agree is useful. But it still seems like in the market, tooling, especially open source tooling for open source compliance, is either not so well understood or it's difficult to get a complete solution. So it seems like the market demand or the knowledge that we need something is high. People getting their hands on the solution is less so. And I was just wondering, is there a reason that people have found it difficult to get tooling? Is there a reason that we're only now talking about sharing data so much? Is there a reason we're still quite young in this field?
I think we're reasonably young. I think there's one area that came up in a few cases. Several of the tools we have are command line tools, and which means that they're great somehow for automation or inclusion in some build loop or CI/CD or else, but they're not super user friendly. There's a strong demand also for having tools that would have a better usability and a UI. So there's that. And second, the integration across tools is also a topic that's lacking. And you see, for better or worse, that several of the commercial tools in the space are essentially focusing on two areas. One, which is user interface, and second is integration. So there's a great opportunity for open source tools to actually also feel the needs. And these are difficult. It's difficult to do a great UI. It requires a lot of effort. It's difficult to do integration with many other environments and CI/CD tools and this and that. So that would be elements of answer. I'm not sure.
No, that makes sense.
Answer, but
That's great. It helps a lot. By the way, I see Thomas has his hand up as well. I'm sorry for taking a lot of time.
Go ahead. No. That's go ahead.
So yeah, I would add to that. There's also several misconceptions. So on one side, I see a lot of new projects come in because people think this is actually an easy problem. There's lots of misunderstandings by developers in, for instance, open source program offices that this is an easy problem to solve. So I still see a regular basis new efforts being open sourced, being tools up. I literally just last week, IBM put out their license scanner. I don't know if people are familiar with that. And I was just looking at it, it's like, okay, so a lot of companies that have the funding for that, they still build their own tools, which still surprises me to be like, how come? And then the number one reason is, oh, that open source tool is written in language X, and we wanted to have it in language Y. And I'm just like, hang on, you rewrite an entire tool because of the language difference. The other side of it, I look from to add Philippe's things. Yeah, Philippe's all valid. Is like, I see a lot of them, the companies, especially when I have lots of conversations, they see us like a vendor, and they don't really know how to deal with this being an open source project. They're like used to buying this in, and they're like, oh, but you're an open source project, how do I get features? Well, you can file a community request, or you can pay one of the commercial partners. So they really don't, they want a whole turnkey silver bullet solution, but they're not necessarily willing to pay for it, either in sweat or in cash. That's on top of the good list that Philippe already mentioned, that the observations that I've seen. We have a lot of the components. Yes, we can make things better, but people are, especially a lot of the companies I deal with, they want a vendor that takes care of everything. They want somebody to blame, and they're basically like, yeah. And we're like, no, like if you want something, you either pay for it or you contribute for it. That's it. And they're like, no, but you should do this and this and this. Like, no, that's not how we operate as an open source. You either prefer cash and you give us money and somebody will build it, or you put sweat in it. And that's something that they completely don't get. What they do like is basically that on the open source tooling, they see that basically we provide way better results than what they can do with the commercial tools. So it's a hard sell. It's a really hard sell.
Yeah. So the other thing that's very clear is that large software organizations, so large software teams in larger corporations, have very different ways to address open source compliance issue. And when let's focusing for a second strictly on licensing. Some may want and stated clearly that they care about doing things as early as possible in the process, going maybe as far as putting gates at the time you're about to use and before you use a software package in software developments. Some others want to do it just before you actually ship and redistribute a product, or in a way that doesn't go in the way of software developers. Some teams may want to have a centralized environment that takes care of processing everything for the whole organization. some others may want to decentralize to the team the responsibility of running the tools and processing their results. So you have very different, even in the same industry, very different ways to think about how to organize the process around compliance. And it's not like you can plug any tool on any process. You need to have tools that have capabilities that can support a given process and organizations. And I think it's much better to do that with open source tools. I don't think commercial tools are well suited for that because they don't offer the right modularity and flexibility to adapt to these different processes today. But the fact that there are so many different ways to look at the same problem and makes it a bit difficult too. All right, so that was, go ahead.
Oh, just a note on the share the data slide.
Yes.
It does seem very, very promising that we've come to the point, though, where people are now saying, well, look, the basic tools can exist, the basic problem can be addressed, and one of the key things we need to do is share this data so we're not redoing the scans and redoing the same review. So it sounds like we're actually at a pretty exciting point.
Yeah, yeah, and there's probably a need also to evolve specific standards and potential tool-to-tools schema to exchange low-level technical data between tools. That's something that came up, whether it's a database schema, and you could say, well, we could use an SBOM for that. Practically, SBOMs are great for exchange between organizations at a high level, but when it comes to tool-to-tool exchange, there's a lot of lossy transformation that goes between the raw scan or the raw output of a tool to an SBOM. And when you do this kind of low-level tool-to-tool integration and exchange, we probably need to have a bit more than just SBOM. Or we can evolve maybe SBOM standards for that, but I don't think that an SBOM can be everything to everything. All right, second key insight, and I fuzzily understood that before, is that licensing and security folks, they just like, it's like oil and vinegar. Maybe it's a bit harsh to say it this way, but there were very clearly, both during the FOSDEM proper and this event, times where there were people that were interested about the topic because it was about licensing, and times when people were interested about the topic because it was security related. But not two people were excited or active at the same time. So I think it's, even though there's a core process, which is determining the origin of code, because the constituents are very different today. We have open source program office mostly today dealing with licensing issues, progressively going into security, but you have security team, InfoSec, AppSec team that deals with vulnerability management. And each of these constituents care a bit less about the problem browsers. That's a fact. It's two different concerns, two different teams eventually. And really the outcome for free and open source project tools in the space is that even though there may be core features which are exactly the same for these two constituents, there need to be differentiated documentation for each audience and a different way to present the tools and the features in this context. And I think that's true also for adopters of these tools, especially as open source programmatics ramp up to provide a wider range of services that cover the whole life cycle of using free and open source software, from inception, such as selection, usage, compliance when it comes to license, dependency management, security issues and vulnerabilities. They will need to make sure that they understand that they will have very different constituents in their organizations. Very simply, a lawyer and a security person are two different folks. That's a gross generalization, but that's the essence there. I expect on my side very strongly that there's a convergence of the two aspects that's going to be there more and more. What we see today in terms of open source tools is that there's very clearly also two kinds of tools that were primarily focusing on license and that are maybe a bit less feature rich on the security side, and tools that have been historically focusing on security issues and that are typically very lightweight on the license side. So you see the same duality on tool side. And I think it's an insight that is both for projects and tools developers and maintainers, but also for the users and the organization that use these tools. Yes, questions?
I would add there's actually a difference in attitudes. So funny enough, when I look at it's always there with license folks is about the details, and security folks is about almost about best effort. And it's really funny when you look at the SBOM side of those two things, where there's a better understanding on the license folks on what actually a good SBOM means than versus a security folks where they have, oh, we have any SBOM. And so I'm not even looking at, I'm looking at the package information. So there's like a really different mindset. Oh, I'm generating an SBOM, so I'm done. So that's when always I talk in security, oh, I'm done. And I'm like, yeah, no. Have you actually talked to the engineering team to make sure that that SBOM was actually matching the actual source code? No, why would we? The tool produces the right thing. And then you look at the license folks, like, of course you would verify it. So there's a really, I said it in the workshop as well. A lot of the discussions what we have is almost like deja vu moments for discussions that we had basically in the licensing community back in 2017 and 2018. And some of the same discussions that we ever hear about resharing data is similar to what we had in 2018. It's not bad, but it's just like,
yeah.
It annoys me a lot when security folks now reinvent the wheel and they're like, Eureka, we have found this out. And I'm like, guys, we already found this out years ago that Docker doesn't work. We found it out years ago that the scanners don't work. It's nothing new.
Yeah. That's part of evolution. It's I think it's normal and sane. There's been a few jolts and major shock waves like last year's Log4j repeat events, which I think show how important it is to get accurate and precise information. There's that. The volume of issues that need to be processed by security teams is high. And it's difficult because there's a lot of false positives and inaccurate information. I think the volume issue is becoming higher and higher when it comes to license, because I see routinely large commercial applications that are deployed using containers that routinely have 5,000 or 10,000 packages. When you have 10,000 packages, I think you're going to have to go into a good enough mode, even on the security, on the licensing side. So I think there's progressively maybe more rigor that's going to go into the security side to have more accurate information about the origin of code, and probably a bit of relaxing that's going to go into the licensing side, just because the volume in many cases is too high for the teams to process. But we'll see. All right, third insight, and maybe it's biased because of the participant there, but there were multiple projects that deal with license compatibility. It's interesting because that's a problem, but that thing that it talks to the problem emerging problem of volume of packages and components we have to deal with, just as I was saying before, is if there are tools that are trying to solve license compatibility, it's because of the volume of issues we may deal with. And they deal in this domain in different ways. So find what's the effect, for instance, of multiple license. That's what the Eclipse on your compliance tool folks called license battles. Or how to surface license compatibility issue like Flicked, for instance, using OSADL data about license compatibility, or in the case of Airmine, how to help legal and understand better what are the key license concerns given SBOMs and scans as an input. So there's a great opportunity there for these projects to collaborate in some way. But the key point is that the fact that there's a concern of automating the base work of sorting out whether there's license compatibility issue or not shows that it's starting to be a real problem at scale. And so that's a third insight that came out of this. Questions? All right, move on. Okay, so some of the follow-up collaboration opportunities. First one, we discuss license compatibility tools. We'd like and we need to create an inventory of all the tools, as I said earlier on as an introduction, such that we can help our users zoom out on what are the capabilities, where to find them. And I guess that's a contrast, in contrast with what's happening in the commercial world. We are prone to collaborate and exchange and reuse our tools to provide more complete solutions. So making it easier is going to be super helpful. So I'd like very simply to start a document, maybe some kind of awesome list of sorts, where we can put all the tools in our space with an explanation of their capabilities, and as a starting point, reusing the plans that the tools authors and maintainers have disclosed during this call. I want to make sure that it's also curated a bit because we're taking notes, and I don't want to misrepresent the plans of any of these tools here. But we're going to have something out pretty quickly. There's also potentially ways to exchange approaches to different dependency detection, resolution, processing. That's something that came out a couple of times, at least, not as prominent as the other insight, but it did. And in order to support better tools-to-tool integration, possibly try to evolve some standard or schema to support lower level data sharing and lower level scan data sharing. There are precedents in the space for static analysis of code. There's a standard called SARIF, SARIF, which means, I think, static analysis result interchange format. So we'll see how it goes. And last but not least, exchanging data. And I'm working on putting together some proposals there, but we need to find a better way to exchange data to address the key concern of many users to avoid redoing the same work over and over again. So that's redoing data within tool. Most tools do it somehow, but also reusing data across tools, potentially supported by shared standards, schemas, to more seamlessly exchange information between tools.
we had a licensing work group meeting a couple of days ago, and it seemed that there was some energy for making that inventory of current open source tools, and what they're covering, what's missing, what's overlapping. So it seems like that might be a collaboration point that we can get started on pretty much immediately.
Yeah, no, definitely. That would be great. Would be great. And it could be, Thomas said earlier on, but there's this company that just released yet another new license scanner. It could be that they were not aware of pre-existing scanners, or they did it before. I know a thing or two about license detection with scan code, of course, and I see effectively a lot of new tools that very often just redo the exact same thing as many other tools that exist before, and they probably would be spending their energies to contribute to existing tools in many cases than scratch their itch by creating yet another copycat of existing tools. So making the information available publicly more easily would be super useful, definitely.
And would it be correct to say that there seems to be a trend towards having these publicly available databases that multiple tools and multiple users of tools can just take quite easily and get started?
Yes, there's no trend really. I mean, there's an effort. There's as I said, OSADL, which tries to produce SPDX document for certain packages. I have myself a new tool called PearlDB to support such kind of efforts, but it's not a publicly available database yet. So I'm not sure there's a trend. There's a need. There's no trend yet.
Okay, it makes sense.
All right. So FOSDEM proper. Go ahead.
Thomas has his hand up as well. I just made a note.
I think basically, because we were going around in circles and circles, sorry to be the devil's advocate, unless we come with a comprehensive reference pipeline where everything works end to end, that you have a story to tell, you will not get through anywhere. So like a lot of people that were in the room, we know how to solve this. And I had discussions also at FOSDEM. Look, if you had probably, God knows, a couple of million per year, we'd have had solved this problem. It would have been cheaper than all the participating companies are currently spending, even in that room. Like it would be a fraction. But it just means a comprehensive effort with funding, right? Like the world will not change. There are so many misunderstandings, and there's no reference solution. I'm convinced that if you go to any manager out there and you give them a reference solution, and then any internal things are like, why are we building this ourselves? Like any manager always, or actually any executive always needs to ask, what are we do? What is our core focus, and what is not our core focus for a company? Unless they get a good answer for it, like they will say, no, take what's off the shelf, go commercial. And we don't have that comprehensive answer on the open source side. There is no end-to-end thing. Like if I look at what we're doing on ORT, the most feedback we get is about, why are you choosing ORT? Because it has the reference workflow process that works end-to-end. That's the number one reason why a lot of people are picking it, because there's a loop in there, and that's what I'm missing with a lot of the FOSS tools. Yes, we have UI problems and people want all the other stuff, but unless you can build an easy workflow out of there that's kind of like turnkey, yeah, it's a component. It's a building block. And I think if we want to change this, then basically, and I might maybe have the devil's advocate here. Put the effort behind, from the foundation or whatever, behind a few tools instead of 20, 30 tools, no matter how great and all the other stuff, but put it behind a few tools to push them over the line so they can really make this user-friendly and all the other stuff, instead of what we're now doing is we're basically, I see we have a 20+ horse race, and all of those horses don't have enough feet to make the finishing line.
Yeah. So I think you're right, but that's part also of the fun. That's part of natural evolution, natural selection. So
Yeah.
eventually this will happen. If it doesn't, it will happen another way. It's been proven difficult to have companies work together to in aggregate provide funding to the actual development of these tools. There's been an effort at the Linux Foundation called ACT, and I don't know whether there's been effective funding that came out of this to actually support the actual development of the tools. So it's a difficult thing. And I agree that it's unfortunate that it's not happening, because if it were to happen, the problem would have been solved a long while ago. Or not all of the problem, but a good part of it. All right, let's continue to FOSDEM proper. So FOSDEM is what happened over the weekend is deliciously messy. It's a university campus that's it's basically you end up having 8 to 10,000 folks roaming freely, unchecked on a university campus that's on it's pretty large. It probably has enough for 20 or 30,000 students, I would guess. So it's a large place. And we have all these different developer rooms that occur over these 2 days. And you end up doing quite a bit of footwork. My typical experience there is I'm going from one presentation to another, which is at the other side of the campus. And along the way, I usually will meet a few interesting people I've not talked in ages working on this or that open source project. And I usually never make it to the place I was planning to go to. And that's probably typical of many folks there. It's in person, so that was really a first. The last in-person event was in 2020, in January 2020, late January. It was very likely a super spreader COVID event, COVID super spreader in 2020. If you put 10,000 people in tightly crowded rooms, tightly packed in crowded rooms for 2 days, just at the beginning, coming from all over the world and then going back everywhere, I'm pretty sure it was then a super spreader. There's, of course, this fringe event that we've discussed, and there's also after events and a lot of parties and beers and French fries, which is a great stuff in Belgium. There were 2 dev rooms of interest that I've been able to attend, at least partially, and that I like to feedback here. First one was legal and policy dev room, which addresses many different topics, but there were two things that came out which were interesting to me. And again, you can go to the FOSDEM website, you can have, in most cases, the slides. In all the cases, you have the live video presentation that you can play and replay at will. One of them was from a lawyer from Google, which was about the unlicensed practice of law in the context of, in particular, open source projects. And you know, we all know this YAML, I'm not a lawyer disclaimer. And that was really interesting because on my side, doing license detection tools, I never know exactly when I'm doing things which would be an interpretation that would be potentially illegal versus just something which would be factual. So that was very interesting. I strongly encourage you to watch this presentation to make sure that you're not stepping into uncharted territory of unlicensed practice of law, and that you're not pissing off the lawyers you're working with. The other thing that came out that's clear is that there's upcoming legislation in Europe called CRA, which means Cyber Resiliency Act. It's at the high level similar to legislations in the US and the US Presidency Executive Order 14028 and similar around SBOMs. But it's a different twist. And it could mandate, basically, if it passes into law, that open source projects adopt processes and practices around security and disclosures, which are in practice awesome, but would be completely impractical for any open source project to adopt, short of having massive funding. And basically, if the law as it's planned today enters into effect in Europe, I think that will be the death of open source in Europe, that bad. So that was a bit of an eye-opening. I think that anybody that's in technology should have an eye towards these upcoming legislations. And if you think it's a problem like most open source foundations think it's a problem, like most technology organizations think it's a problem, because it won't only affect open source projects, it will affect everyone that produces software. It's time to make sure that you check it out and you can eventually lobby if you have lobbying capabilities, potentially against the proposed legislation in its current form. It's going to affect you whether you are in Europe or anywhere else in the world, as long as you're doing some business with Europe. So that was a really important insight. The second thing was the SBOM dev room. So there were many more things to discuss there. It was a whole day around the software bill of materials. A lot of SPDX. It was organized by folks from SPDX. So of course, it was a lot about it. There were many presentations on how tools can produce SBOMs, which is great. But on the other hand, there's a few tools and probably even fewer teams that care or can consume SBOM. So it was, I think there's really a demand-supply imbalance issue that needs to be addressed there. Because what do you do if you have all these SBOM being created and you can have all the discussions you want about the quality, the content, the trust and else, but if you don't have a way to make sense and consume them, that's going to be an issue. Another thing that came out is it seems to me that projects that deal with embedded software build, such as Yocto or Buildroot, are more advanced to integrate SBOM into their tooling and workflows than others. At least they were presenting there, and they seem to have quite a few capabilities. I noted also that there's eventually large organizations that are evolving their own conventions and processes on top of existing SBOM standards. So, which I think is a great thing. Eventually, this is something that may happen in every organization, is how you can use SBOMs to as a glue and as a mechanism for data exchange across larger teams or larger concerns in large organizations. And two other things, VEX, which means vulnerability exploitability exchange. When it comes to security issue, everybody seems to talk about it at some level, may emerge as something that's even more important than the software bill of material. One way you can think of a VEX would be to say, in my tool, this vulnerability applies or doesn't apply, and if it applies, it's how you could remediate that. And so it's a statement that's provided by the creator of typically a product, and that says whether a given vulnerability applies or not applies in the context of the tool, whether it's been remediated. In the context of security, it's probably at some level even more important than the SBOM itself, which is whether a security issue applies. This is completely unrelated to licensing issues where, of course, having a full inventory of every third-party package and component always applies. And last but not least, I created this small stuff called package URL, and I was super happy and psyched to see it used mostly everywhere as an identifier for software packages in SBOMs. So we still have 4 minutes. If there are questions here, otherwise we'll be done for the day.
The only question I've got is, do you know of anywhere we can find out more about the different SBOM stuff going on, like presentations where we could learn more about the Siemens bomb on Cyclone or interoperability between SPDX and Cyclone? Is there any venue we should get? Yeah.
Specifically, so you can watch the live streams that were provided here.
Okay.
So, for a start, so if you go to fosdem.org/ well, just fosdem.org, it's going to direct you directly to the 2023 here.
Okay.
You go to the schedule tab, like I'm doing right now, and you could search for SBOM or software bill of material.
Yes, and there you go.
There you go. So you have the full schedule of presentation that took place.
Oh wow! Yes.
And
perfect.
For instance, if you want to know more about this presentation from the folks, so if you were not lucky to be in person there, say you want well, this presentation here, so you will always have the live video. In some case, you'll get also the slides, and you have all the presenters, and that's live as it took place.
The importance of software, of course, leads us directly to.
There you go.
That's amazing. That's
so,
brilliant.
Even if you've not been able to get there, you can really have all the talks as if you were in the room. You won't be able to ask questions, but I strongly encourage you to come next year. It's really worth the trip. It's an experience, definitely an experience.
Thank you so much, Philippe. Does anyone have any last question? We're just at the hour, so we're just about done, I think. Okay. Philippe, this was a fantastic overview, and thank you for also encouraging some back and forth with a few questions that hopefully were interesting to our audience. 49th webinar, it's a heck of a thing, and having FOSDEM to feature was brilliant. Thank you as well to our entire audience, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one, number 50, in the next couple of weeks. Be well, be safe, and let's talk again soon.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
And I hope to see you in person or online.
Oh, yes, you will. Bye-bye.